Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today I want to welcome Harry Challenger. He is a field ufologist and contact reporter. In 1996, he joined Ilufon, a London-based UFO investigation group, and launched Down to Earth magazine as a London-based UFO magazine. In 2004, he took over editorship of Flying Saucer Review, and in 2010 started the UFO Academy with Catherine O'Neill. Last year, he started AIM, Alien Interaction Media. Harry, welcome. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm in near London, that's where I'm based.
In Laughlin in February of this year, you had an amazing presentation. It blew my mind. Some of the images and videos and some of the theories you presented, it brought such a fresh perspective to the field of ufology, something I've never experienced before. So I'm very much looking forward to tonight. And I thought we'd start with a little bit more about what I mentioned in your bio, a little bit more about your background and what got you started down this path.
Probably it was January 1996. I'd finished college. I was working in the healthcare sector. And as a sort of social service, I was traveling around with a lady who was visiting old people's homes, and I'd come along and just greet the old ladies. And I wasn't there in an official capacity. It was just like a charity type thing. And when we were leaving the building, which is only near where my childhood home is, I noticed a small dot moving around inside the beam of the infrared camera. So if you imagine where infrared cameras watching a particular door, I could see a light moving diagonally inside it. Now, that was probably the first time I'd seen anything that was paranormal, and this was January 1996. At the same time, I'd been working on myself using psychic training. So really, my beginning starts with psychic training in natural medicine, which is something called kinesiology. And I'd also, someone had opened me, as they call it, where someone meditated who did Kundalini yoga, and this chap who was from one of the Dutch Caribbean islands, or he was a Dutchman from one of the Caribbean islands, he meditated into me. He said, "Would you like me to open you?" And he meditated into me, and I had a Kundalini sort of reaction. So I'd really been leading up to a point where my psychic awareness had built over a period of probably 4 years. So probably from 1992 to 96, I'd been studying the meridians, the points on the body that were like energy points. And all that time, unbeknown to me, I was becoming more and more sensitive and more aware. And then January 1996, I see this light, which then begins to become an independent sphere of light as I return each time to that building. And then a large, what shall I say, a sphere of like steam. So it's like a ether. Now, fortunately, there were people with me who could see some of it. So there was an Irish lady, because I'm from the Irish community. I was walking around, coming out, and we'd see the orb together. And then this strange lights followed me home gradually. So again, I knew they were something paranormal. I'd never seen anything like them before. And I got to the point where I was in contact with what I thought were orbs. And I thought they were orbs. And most people get to that stage. Many people have seen paranormal lights. Then it escalated, and I started seeing UFOs, and I started seeing entities, because the actual orbs were entities. They would unfold into entities. So I was seeing the raw appearance of what an alien entity is, which is a ball of light. And then I was seeing UFOs, a lot of them. And luckily, again, I was with people sometimes when I saw them to keep the sanity level. So this is very important for newly contacted people. You need some fellow witnesses, and that's why I went to London. And there was an organisation called Lufos that had been around for about 30 years, and then we formed our own group called Ilufon, which was Essex and London UFO Network.
I wanted to know when these entities would manifest from these orb forms. What would they look like?
Well, it started off, the first one I saw was a very unusual thing which I hadn't seen since, and it was about the April the 3rd, 96, and I woke up to an entity who actually had some form of aqua lung on. on. So it was wearing a breathing mask. It was about 3 foot tall, and it had slit eyes, and it was surprised when I woke up. It was quite surprised, and I sat up, and it actually, I'm not going to say it sounds crazy, but it does. It reversed time and backtracked to where it had come in and left as an orb with a ring around it. So it's the only time I've seen an orb with a ring around it, and it just left. Now I went up the road to look for it, because at this stage I've been trying to film orbs, and I went up to, this was a lovely spring day, so this would have been April the 3rd, 96. I went up and there was a wall of fog at the end of my road into a public park, a little small park that's there. And I sort of knew that that wasn't normal, because there was no fog anywhere else, and it was very, very thick. So I walked into it and I got quite frightened, because I felt there was something in there. So it was, I'd gone in with my camera. It was very much like one of those films, Communion, walking around with a camera trying to catch them. And I walked into that fog, and I got the left side of the road, and I became very frightened. And that was, I left it at that point. But there was actually 5 entities with that entity. Each one formed an orb and left the room. And I did actually draw some of these entities. I can stick them up for you if you want. I was trying to
sure.
Do I just click on them, isn't it?
Just hit your share screen button first,
yes.
and then
Let's just see what that is. Share screen is on.
Then just hit screen.
Screen, that's it. Oh, it's gone. Hang on. Oh, where did that go? Has it gone up the top? Oh, there we go.
Yes, I have it here on my side.
Can you see it? I just keep losing it. It keeps going up to the top. Hang on. Right, I can, because I'm trying to look at my, sorry, I haven't done this before. See what I've got. There it is. Where would I put it? Just click on it, and it will come up. Now if I move that away, can you see that?
Yes, not? I can, yes.
Yeah, now that's, these are hand-drawn. These are not images, they're hand-drawn. And this is a woman that started appearing from about, I would say, late April 96, and she had a covered face, but her eyes were very much like an animal rather than a human. So I'm obviously used to seeing humans. I'll just pull down another one. I've just got another one there. Now this is the kind of colouring they would have had, so that's why it's all sort of fuzzy. I'll just zoom on it a little bit. And it's kind of like a mask worn over the face. So it's like very much like the Phantom of the Opera, sort of a mask with, it seems to be a bit feline, I'll say that for it.
Is this a drawing or an actual photo?
It's all drawings. I tried my best to create realism. So everything I do is about realism, and that's like what I would see. So you wake up in the dark, and you'd see a face or a head sort of somebody in the room with you, and it's in a kind of ether-like smoke, but you'd see them, and they'd be watching, looking at us, or looking at you, and they were interactive. So for me, I've not talked about it, this is not what I was going to talk about, but what it means is when you meet people who have encounters, if you have encounter experience, it's so much easier to reassure them. Now, we've got to look at, this is the evidence gathering. And the problem is there's a big group of people who have perceived encounters. Now, some of those people, unfortunately, have got mental health issues. Some people have fear and post-traumatic stress disorder from seeing real beings. And then there's people who, I could say, can hold it together and are able to talk about their encounters. So you've got like a variety of people. If you're a contact researcher, you're dealing essentially with trauma, in my opinion, and you need to get these people reassured. So for me, this is the best image I've got, because these beings would come up to my face and I could see them at close quarters, and they were interactive, and they were intelligent, they were living, and they were quite clearly light being type creatures, because I think there's different stages of materialization. So you have like ether, light balls, etheric light beings, and then you're getting towards solid beings after that. So these were light beings, and they were bedroom visitors. So I could see them in detail, but I could also put my hand straight through them because they weren't solid. It was almost like holograms. So, you know, this is where, if you're a contact investigator, you really need to understand these manifestations. If you go in with just, oh, well, it must have opened the door and walked in, or did it dematerialize like Star Trek, that's not going to help you. These things are very different to science fiction. They are not going to necessarily come to you with a cosmic message. I mean, this idea that they're going to come in and the first thing they're going to do is tell you the meaning of life, that's not how it is. So they are very much one-to-one interactors, and they are interested in the individual, and you have interactions, and if you're lucky, you can engage and actually get productive communication, because these are not going to tell you the answers and the meaning of life. And I think this is where I'll start with, is the entity encounter. We have to understand the nature of it. So you're dealing with an intelligence which is able to form into solid matter if it wants. It can turn into light. It can manifest into your mind and read what you're thinking, or tell you about your past encounters, experience, or anything you've done. So this is like an invasive intelligence, if you could say it that way. It's able to penetrate you. It can actually cause you to have emotion, and it can actually give you empathy. It can almost teach you. And these are the kind of things that we're just not getting from currently. So I tried to make Flying Saucer Review, and I have dealt with the history of it. It's been around since '55. Was to catch that humanity and catch that emotion of, what I'm looking for is the emotion.
Now, when it comes to people's contact experiences, I've interviewed quite a few abductees, contactees, and although there may be a few similarities, each person's experience is profoundly different.
Yes.
In many cases, you have your physical experiences where you're actually taken on a ship. I find most of the experiences are either dream or astral, if you want to call it. Is that something you've also found in your research?
Yes, I found that there are people who literally get taken in a way that is completely outside physical reality, and it's very difficult for them to verify. So in my personal opinion, these things are working on a quantum level if they want to, and they can dematerialize you without you ever disappearing. It's too weird we're getting into arrangements of space that we don't understand. So if we're going to be hearing someone who gets taken in an instant and returned in an instant, which I have spoken to a friend, and actually this encounter is a friend of mine in America. He's an ex-friend now, because he's moved to America for the last 20 years. But while we were out on a UFO research visit, he didn't tell us at the time, but he got taken for 2 seconds, or 2 or 3 seconds. And we didn't notice anything, but he had burns afterwards. That's why he contacted me from America. He was a decent enough chap. And he had burns on his torso, which were like keloids, which appeared afterwards. And he was quite traumatized because he was suddenly taken we're actually at Rendlesham Forest. And it was not really a great particular research visit. I don't really do Rendlesham. It's not my area. It's not an area that I get involved in. But what disturbed me was how he could be taken while we were there and not notice. And I have seen that myself. So I've been, we used to go to London and Walthamstow. We used to pick up a lot of we used to have like a very London-based group. That's what Ufon was. It was a city-based UFO group. And I went there, and I remember looking at the gentleman we were picking up, and there were two entities at his door momentarily for 2 or 3 seconds, dressed like in children's overcoats, just standing at the door, and then they were gone. And it seems to be, this is the nature of why these abductions go, they're so difficult, or these encounters are so difficult to deal with, because you're looking at slices of time, you're looking at bubbles, if you like, of time. So you're looking at an event that's happening superimposed. And this is why when you do alien research, when you look at witnesses and trying to understand the timeline, some people don't seem to get it that your timeline can be a second, or the timeline can be half a second, or it can be 3 hours, or it can be a week. But it's just, you know, we have to stop thinking like humans, I suppose. We're going into an environment. For me, what I look for is the quality of the description. So I have met, unfortunately, deluded people, and I've met people who are mentally ill, and their descriptions fail them. So it's very easy. I mean, I work in healthcare. We run a psychotherapy clinic here, which I don't, you know, it's nothing to do with my UFOs. And I work in healthcare, and I'm very aware of mental health. I spend a lot of time talking to mental health related people. So I know that when I meet someone who's had a mental health related encounter, it's their descriptions. They don't have any detail. They don't have any descriptive, because it is more of a disorientation of their reality that's based on their mental health, and they don't observe things. But if you talk to someone who's had a genuine encounter, immediately they start to bring in descriptive terms that you've seen before. You find that they have descriptions of the environment, descriptions of the entity, how it moved, how their body felt. And really, people who have imaginary experiences or experiences from mental health don't have those descriptions. So once you become experienced, you can pretty quickly determine who's fairly authentic. I mean, there's still problems in that a lot of abductees and contactees are unpredictable people who are vulnerable emotionally, and they're not easy people to work with. So some of the early things I noticed as an investigator, that's why I call myself a field researcher. So we would go out in London, anywhere, to anyone who'd had an encounter. And we would sit with them, interview them I call it 1950s ufology. We'd sit down, we'd make notes, we'd write up the case, we would continue a relationship with them, and we would work, you know, that's like being a police investigator almost. You come in, and they were relieved to find anyone that was vaguely interested. So we were young at the time. I was in my mid-20s, and most of my friends were in their mid-20s, but we were a dedicated London group, and we were picking up all kinds of alien activity. So one of the ones that we picked up were police encounters, which again, the police were very wary of what they were doing. I mean, these appear often in the MUFON journals and a lot of the old newspapers in America back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Then the police stopped talking about it. Well, it looks like the police are still having encounters, but they don't talk about it now. But the occasional time you'd find someone who'd had an encounter. So for me, that's where I'm going with it, that we were field researchers. That's the best training you can have. And yes, you'll make mistakes. And yes, you'll find people who are difficult and people who disappear. Most of the time, these people would talk to you for a bit and disappear. But you'd get frontline information, first primary information. This is where I'm going with this subject. We mustn't be quoting from books. It's a big mistake. If we can use books and we can talk about convergence of ideas and evidence, but we must always go to source material. We have to go to source. And, you know, I come from somebody, I don't want to criticize others. So my view is, what I believe is I give the information as I see it and how I want to do it. Other people can have their own views on this. It's not for me to determine. But I just think that frontline research became very rare. And back in the 90s, there was still quite a few UFO groups going. We were very lucky to meet some of the veterans, which I'll come on to in a minute. But now in 2020, very few researchers out there, very, very few. People just don't do it. And many authors particularly, and again, I'll never ever say that they're wrong, I'm just saying that it's interesting. Some authors have never done a single case. Now that's concerning to me. How can you determine data if you've never even done a single case? My view is you can never do enough cases. It's just luck how many you can fit in. So what I tend to do is use people that I know. So rather than go on the web, so I do use the web, but I ask people who ask people who ask people, and these chains work really well. And you find cases, and then you can go to that person and you can start to to do the work that you need. And that way, if you get a case that way, it's very different to finding someone blindly. Though I do find some very good cases online, but I do go using chains of networks of people. So that's what, sorry, that's where I was at. I said too much there.
No, very good. Now, I wanted to ask you, when it comes to the UAP and UFOs, the actual craft themselves, I know that when people see a sighting, there's a lot of misidentification. A lot of it is military, could be black projects, it could be just misidentifying anything in the sky. What would be the best way that we can tell that this is an off-planet or interdimensional or something that we didn't make?
That's a really good question, for sure. I mean, what I tend to go with is some of the basic old school ufology, which is when I'm watching a UFO and all sound stops. So if the sound and ambient sound stops, a military aircraft can't do that. They can't control ambient sound. So a very close UFO sound sighting, you will not hear sound. You will not hear ambient sound. So that's something. For me, the drift and float of a UFO is still not reproducible by the military. So this complete weightless, floating kind of movement that you see. Now the problem is, of course, that you get some very good sort of balloons that are very unusual shapes. So they've got to have a powered movement, which isn't a drone, because the problem with a drone is it's got, again, it will have that type of movement. That's what a drone will do, as opposed to a UFO, which I'm using my hand, is a very floating movement. It doesn't have any hard changes. I'm trying to think how you'd... Most UFOs give off light. And again, I'm pretty certain the military stuff we've got is using partial UFO fields. So it's got some sort of energy drive, which is conventional, and some magnetism. So for me, when you see big spectrums of light on your UFO, so if it's completely black or completely white, like a bleached white pearl, or if it's jet black, for me, that military UFOs can't do that. From my perspective, I'm not in the military. I'm just saying that I would go by the aura, I would go by the sound effects, I would go by, drones can only stay out for about 20 minutes, the average person's drone, if it's an ordinary drone, because there's a chap called Charles Lamoureux who works out of Canada. He's very good on infrared, and he's very good on drones, and he does tend to pick up that there's a lot of drone footage out there, and you've got to look at what drones are used for. They're used for building inspections, they're used to inspect cabling. So again, if you see an object moving along a cable, now unfortunately UFOs do that. But I would say, I think the spectrum is the key, the emissions. So a UFO that's brilliantly reflective. So when you look at it, it dazzles you. And at night, if you see a UFO and it's a mile away, it will still blind you. If you see a conventional light, it won't. So I'm thinking light intensity is one. It often bleaches the camera sensor. So these are things that I would go for. So at night, it's the light intensity. A UFO that has just ordinary lights is much harder to identify. They do mimic plane lights. You've got to remember that a UFO, a classic behavior from a UFO, is to take on the navigation lights of an aircraft and mimic an aircraft, or even mimic an aircraft's hull. I mean, I've seen UFOs mimic aircraft. It's very difficult if they want to be hidden, but if they want to show themselves to you, you will see a pitch black, which is almost like you imagine what a black hole would be. All the light is collapsing into that magnetic field. And we're talking, I mean, I did talk to a chap who used to write quite good books in the 1980s called Alan Watts. Now, he was a UFO writer, and he talked about 6 to 7 gigatesla magnet power. Now, that power would liquefy a human body. So if you stood next to that, it would liquefy you. That's how powerful that magnetic field is. But it would be enough to bend light completely and give you a black smear on the UFO, so no light reflects back. Or you have the opposite, which is all the light reflects back and it's like a brilliant mirror. I don't think the military have anything as efficient as that. They have capacity to create fields, but they can't produce that level of gigatesla. I don't think they can do it. Now that's just my opinion. I think we've got hybrid type aircraft, there's no doubt, but they're not like that. And they're not able to do this sort of gliding that we see. So either stationary and angle, it will be at 45 degrees. So if you see a disc that's stationary, and this was noted by Wilbur Smith back in the 50s, the UFO will sit at 45 degrees. It's part of the field that it uses to cut the Earth's field with. It's 45 degrees. These are things you can spot. A UFO can blink out. I don't think our military can blink out. They can do some camouflage. They can, but I don't think they can blink out. I think all this technology is at the hybrid stage. A UFO, you see it on YouTube, which is one of the great ways to spot a fake. When they see them zip out like that, that doesn't happen, in my view. That's very rare. They blink out in an instant and then appear somewhere else. That's how quick they're, and under a frame of a camera sensor. They're under a frame, so you'll get translocation. Again, I think the military are just not at that level. I just don't think they are. That's my personal opinion. The more you look into propulsion, the more you realize how big an ask it is to get to their level. Even when we know what we're trying to do, I don't think we're anywhere near. So I think we've got a lot of stealth aircraft that can make themselves semi-invisible, but I don't think we've got anything like what they've got. So I'd go for the magnetic field as the most light effects on a UFO. If you can see some spectacular light effects or some, I would say field effects, static electricity possibly, anything like that, that's a UFO for me. That's more alien-like. But there is, I've seen drones, I've seen unmanned drones. Most cities use drones for the police. The military are using drones routinely, even in this country. So you're going to see drones, you're going to see drones being used routinely for inspections of buildings and bridges and power lines. So if they are doing something that looks like they're going up and down, then it's quite possibly a drone. And it will have a red and green light navigation light on it. And these are the sort of things that Charles Lamoureux draws people to. So that's my thoughts on it. But yeah, you certainly are going to have real problems if you're looking at YouTube videos. You're going to have real problems. They're so many low intensity lights. My view is every single UFO image that has a low intensity light is questionable. When you look at a UFO light, even from 2 or 3 miles away, it's blindingly bright from 2 or 3 miles away. That's how bright it is. Fortunately, the hoaxers don't know that, and they have all these faded lights going around the screen. That's not a UFO in my book, but that's my opinion. Yeah.
Now, speaking of genuine photos, you've put together a few photos and a couple of videos, along with some information that you could share with us tonight. If you want, you can go ahead and pull up your screen, and anything you have to share regarding this, go at it.
Yeah, I'll try and take you through. I showed some stuff at the Rokfin event. I'm just trying to see now where my I think it's on there. Let's have a look.
Yeah, the presentation in Laughlin was mind-blowing. Images like I have never seen before. Absolutely fantastic.
This is one of my favorite images. Now, these were from Sussex. People can believe or not believe what they want to believe. For me, it's the light. You see the light quality of that deep red. For me, that's UFO colors are very vivid. They're a form of, like, I describe it like paraffin running on a surface. The kind of refracting light is so different on UFOs. Thankfully, the hoaxers haven't got a clue what that is. Like the how to create the palette that a UFO should have. That for me reminds me. I know it sounds weird, but this particular image reminds me of a scar, if you like, almost like a symbol of like the gulf between us, like we're so far from getting close. And for me, that image, in particular, it's actually a 2-layered disc, which again is understood by ufologists. There it is again, it's sort of a side view. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these pictures are less than satisfying. There are pictures where it's in the middle, but what you're looking at here is a 2-plate UFO, which are described by many, many people for many decades. So let's just see where we're at here. Just see what that is.
It seems to me throughout the years the phenomenon has actually kind of evolved possibly with people's consciousness. You went from the airships to the classic saucers, and now we're seeing more plasma-like or just light ships.
We're getting closer, aren't we, to this? We're getting closer. That's what's happening. We're getting closer to being able to see them as they are. So our brain has to construct our reality. That's where we're stuck at. We have to actually come to terms with what we're seeing. So over time, my belief is it's almost like when they describe the evolution of people's brains, how they were able to hear music differently through the ages, that we became more progressive. That's what I was looking for. This was what I was looking for. And this is something I filmed myself back in 2004, and that was a flying man type.
Oh, wow.
That was from here, but that was 2004 when I took over the magazine. I had 3 very good pieces of footage, and this was a person standing on a platform with 3 little stalks. I did show that, I think, at Rokfin.
Yes,
it goes behind
yes.
roses. Those are rose bush stems, and it does it slow it down. It will move so you can see through the cracks in the rose bush leaves. So it's almost like a where I'm looking from. And then it morphs, see it morphing. Unfortunately, I then zoom out so you can see how far away it is.
I've seen a few videos very similar to this where the object appears to just morph into different shapes.
This is the mystery of UFOs, that no single UFO shape needs to stay as that shape. It can change. That's where we're at. So going deeper into there now, you'll see me. He's now a man in a chair. It's become like an ejector seat flying. And then I run out and I get him dropping like an insect type movement. So also, if you hear me, because I'm a bit experienced by then, I thank the object for being there. So this is like, when you get like familiar, you actually do try and have dialogue, even when you're trying to film and you're trying to make sense of things. You can still talk to them. And that's what most good contactees teach you, that even when you're in a contact, you can be talking and they'll hear what you're saying. So there you go, it disappears out the picture. I'll stop that now.
That was fascinating.
Well, that was an interesting piece, because for me it's very personal. It was, you see, what I believe is, and this is what my ethos is, if we get closer to them, it's because of our actions and the way we interpret and evolve into their space, if you like. So to get into their world, we're going to have to understand that they actually fly. These beings fly. I mean, I've seen them do it. Again, it's very disturbing. It was probably back in '96. And I was standing outside a clinic I had in London, and I watched one of them fly past at about 100 feet. Now, for me, what was interesting, there were some ducks flying along because we were next to a lake. We were based next to a lake in London, a reservoir. And the ducks could see this thing coming up behind them, and they flew in a panic. You know, the ducks were trying to get away. And for me, it meant the ducks could see it, I could see it. But if they are able to do this, and that's what that object you just saw was, it was like a flying chair. Now, I've only ever found one picture from an Italian UFO journal called UFO Notizario, which means UFO News. This is what I saw, a figure in a kind of padded clothes with a helmet, which is exactly what I used to see. That type of helmet was what I was drawing earlier, if you remember. Now, I don't know where this came from. This picture, it's written in Italian. It says a mystery photograph. I don't know what Kinesi means. I wish I could speak Italian, but for me, that's what I saw, this strange figure. Now, it looks something like Star Wars, but I can assure you it's not. And a floating flying man tells you how different they are to us, because when they visit our city, they're flying over the top. They're looking down on us. And certainly our little UFO group had encountered people traveling across London on occasion, just at night or in the evening, and they'd look up and a person would be in a chair, sort of looking down as they go over. And this was before anything that we have now. You know, it was before drones and things like that. This was, so for me, it's like you understand when they penetrate our airspace, they're coming in through your window and they're coming through the glass. I mean, the people who are abducted describe either being taken through the glass or then coming through the glass or coming through the door, like through the wood of the door, not through the actual entrance. And this is like our starting point. We really are stuck if we don't have the fundamentals. So for me, it's like getting the language, getting the ideas, moving ourselves progressively closer to their level of space, should we say. And it means our thinking brings greater contact. So if we have like limited thinking, we get limited contact. And for me, it's about practical, non-personality based ufology. So that means talking about ideas, doing work, doing encounter research, doing experiments, if you like, with psychic stuff, or experiments with electrophysics, or whatever you want to do. But it is about the actual work. And, you know, I'm less impressed by people who bring personality into it. It worries me. Ufology needs to be about work, and it needs to be about teams and people taking on projects. And this is where I'm going in my evolution now. So I think where did we get up to? We got up to 1996 and the Lufon, and that really started me off. And then I got involved with Gordon Crichton, who was he was the oldest ufologist in the world at the time, as far as I know. I knew him in his 90s. He lived to 95. He was a founder of Flying Saucer Review. It entered at issue 3. And there was a whole group of friends of his who were all dead, who had been the first ufologists. And these are the people that bring me like the dignity of the subject. These were the old men of the subject. There were old women too, there were some. And these people were very different. They wore suits, they had tea, and they talked like gentlemen and wore blazers. I mean, I was lucky enough in 96 to meet some old ufologists who still wore UFO blazers, which I loved. Normally I wear a UFO tie still in their memory. You know, I wear a tie with flying saucers on it, but I didn't today. So for me, they were like dignified researchers who were first generation, the first people who did it. And I must say, they tried to keep it impersonal. There were problems even then with personalities, and the subject has to deal with this issue. When people promote a personality, it's got to be, you know, should we say, out-evolved by quality ufology. So people who want to put themselves forward as opposed to the work, they're a problem for the subject, because that's what the public sees. They see these people who are banging on about themselves. We want the work to be the thing we bang on about, and we want to talk about other people, because the Flying Saucer Review was all about other people. Most of my, like 99% of the content was about looking around the world at UFO researchers from other countries and talking about what was good. So that's what my ethos was to find the best and the good. And I can just show you what a cover of a modern FSR looks like. Can you see that, or do I have to do share screen?
Yeah, share screen. Mm-hmm.
2 seconds, share screen.
Can you hear me right now?
I can, yeah.
Okay, my mic was kind of cutting out.
Right, that's one of the latest issues. Now that was about alien motherships, which are great big ships that are way, way bigger than any normal UFO, and women who've had alien interest in their pregnancies. And for me, that there was a very particular type of article we write, which is about the actual sighting and reconstructing the sighting using architectural data and relative size to explain how someone experiences a UFO up close that's very massive. Then we go into how people estimate the size of a UFO relative to other objects. I mean, these are very useful kind of practical things. And then we get into, some of these UFOs are big as mountains. These were Yukon cases, various massive craft. And then we get to what I find most interesting, which is the other part of this FSR was about women who've been interfered with while pregnant. And one of the most important cases, which was one that had been publicized by an American ufologist, but I got some more interview out of it, which was Also anonymous postings on the web about pregnant women and their UFO encounters. Let's just see where we are. It's probably just coming up. The alien in our children's bedroom. And this story was about a person, I think it was in Nebraska, who had a UFO come into his children's bedroom and shine a light through the wall. Now, what they didn't realize at the time was the light was shining through directly at the pregnant mother in the next room, through the wall. And the very unusual encounter was these beings came through the children's bedroom, materialized towards the pregnant mother, and they actually were caught on camera speaking. Now, the weird thing is they spoke in English, which is insane unless they wanted to be observed. And the phrase they used was, "they must not know," which is a fairly sinister comment, but they also were talking about what they didn't realize at the time was that one of the fetuses had failed. There'd been twins and one had died. So there was a single fetus. And these beings seemed to be alluding to the fact that one of them wasn't alive. The life force wasn't right. So the lifeline. So let's just pop back. But because they spoke in English, we have to assume there is no life light, we cannot let them know. That's the phrase they use. On a camera, it's picked up on a phone camera, and the kind of blurry entity in the children's bedroom. And there's no life light. It was later they found out that she lost one of the fetuses. So they were looking specifically at a pregnant woman's tummy. Now, this got into some of the issues of ethics, because what are they doing looking at a human fetus and being so invasive?
Well, that's a recurring theme as well, is interactions with pregnant women, and even cases of people seeing hybrid children on ships, possibly their own hybrid children,
this is
things
the
like
point.
that.
Yeah, this is exactly where because I've actually written a piece, I'll read it out to you to give you an idea of what we talk about. And this is getting to why FSR is like a forum. And this is my opinion, but I think it's not personality driven, it's driven by the evidence. So the comment is at the end of some descriptions of women who had babies interfered with. How much control does a human mother have over the implantation and gestation of her fetus when she is also an abductee? What is the alien role in the new life inside her, if it is indeed engineered by them, or alternatively, if it is conceived naturally? We need to sift through all the hidden case evidence to discover dispassionate descriptions of how alien life forms have been observed interacting with pregnant abductees and contactees. The lady we dealt with, we made up a name. For Monica Nova and the anonymous pregnant abductees described here, what kind of pre-selection took place? Did aliens fully engineer their fetus's existence? Are there failed engineering experiments, as in the case of Monica Nova's baby? What constitutes failure of an alien intervention in a human conception? If we don't know the objective, how do we define a success? Monica Nova latterly gave birth to a child genius. Now, this happened to another contactee that I investigated. The editor has met another French abductee with a similar son who had an enhanced intelligence and lateral thinking aspect. Is that the target of the intervened pregnancy? What of the abductees who fail? Are there also broken products of alien engineering? So there was 2 alien contacted people who've had genius children that I know. Now, I don't know, it's not statistical, it's what we call anecdote, but it's interesting. Are we looking at an enhanced pregnancy of some kind? So that's where I'm going from it. I'm looking at this and saying, I took a number of cases of anonymous postings on the web, women who'd become pregnant after abduction. And the strange case from Nebraska, that lady was infertile. Then she became an abductee, as far as we can tell, and then she had 4 children. So did they interfere with her infertility? She was more surprised that she was having children. My personal opinion is that they have an interest in the whole conception process in certain people, only in certain people. And they are in some way looking to engineer, even I would go as far as, if you've heard of Eve Lorgan, she wrote some good work about 20 years ago called The Love Bite. And there was a suggestion that abductees are brought together for an enhanced sort of potential for pregnancy. Now, there was people who felt they'd been manipulated and had met people that they'd known in some ways, even during abductions, they'd known these people. And then they'd been brought together and became breeding couples. Now, that would make us much more like farm animals if it was the case. I can't say for sure, but there's definitely an ethical question. If they are interfering in these abductee type people, or if they're, if they're interfering in pregnancies, these are the most defenseless parts of humanity as a fetus. It's the most defenseless part. If an entity is experimenting in any way with a human fetus, there's ethical questions here. And that brings up to, why do we bother to study these in the first place? Well, we've got to be studying them because there's some things which are questionable that are going on. So, for me, the whole idea of manipulating human beings, we don't know. If we're like, most people are comforted by not knowing. And it's a great relief to the people who don't know. They are actually in a much happier, sort of serene ignorance compared to us who know. And I often find people don't really want that veil pulled back for that reason, because they have to carry the knowledge of knowing. So, for me, the more you inquire and discover, the more uneasy you feel about the autonomy that we supposedly have, the influence that we have. Yes, and it can be positive. There's no doubt that there's a possibility that they're enhancing us, but we don't actually have any say, or we don't even know what the processes are. But when you get into a case where a pregnant woman's tummy has been hit by a beam of light through a wall, and then the entities are discussing the life light inside her belly of our fetuses, that's pretty disturbing. That, it's like, I would say, doctors, and the other lady who's called Monica Nova in that particular issue describes them as doctors. When she was a child, these men that would come in, these small men who would come in, would talk about her in their own sort of way while she was paralyzed. They'd be talking and discussing her. Again, like, she has no agency. She's lying there watching them, and they hurt her. Now, for me, this is like where we're going into the depths of the subject. We're finding out that we aren't actually as autonomous as we think. We're not actually in a position to make all our decisions about our fate and the fate of our civilization. If this strangeness is going on, we need to know about it. But I think most people can't handle it. I'm going to say it in honesty. Most average members of the public don't have the tools to deal with the idea that we could be manipulated and controlled to some level. And as I say, I don't like conspiracy, so I'm talking about based on what's reported, not on ideas of persecution or strange conspiracies. I don't believe in that. I don't agree with it. I believe it has to be all based on case evidence, but there's enough case evidence to show that pregnant women are interfered with in a way that seems to be unethical. Sorry, I'll let you carry on that. That was FSR. That's why I got into FSR.
Well, it brings me to for most cases, do you find that it's reported that they're positive experiences, or are they negative? Do you think these entities are benevolent?
I think if you are in a balanced frame of mind and you have an alien encounter, you tend to hold it together. The problem is, if you get an indiscriminate alien encounter for someone who's in an imbalanced situation, it can damage them. So I think it's their selection. If they pick someone who can handle it, so I've met 2 or 3 very good contactees who are very well-rounded people who can handle it and have a kind of peace of mind that they've created. But I've also met people after encounters who completely fall apart. And again, there doesn't seem to be any selection to protect those people. So the majority of people put it behind them. They call it their weird encounter, and they might talk about it occasionally for the rest of their lives. There's a small group of people who are like myself, who then pursue it and want to get to resolution with it. So my view is most humans can't handle it because it's multidimensional. The human brain tends to come apart. These people tend to lose their focus. They tend not to have balanced lives. So one of the most important things that I do since I was encountering in the mid-90s is have a completely normal life and have a normal life with people that I know. So, when I'm around in my daily routine, it's not aliens that I'm talking about, and it's not UFOs. I'm talking about anything but that, and that way it protects me. And I think that that's the way to do it, is to create a life as if you've never had any encounters, and then compartmentalize. And I specifically, my area is to go after contact cases, and that's what I'll probably talk about for the rest of it, is just getting into why it's important to work with contact cases and what we can get from it. So there's a load of stuff in the FSR back catalogue from Latin America, going back from the 50s all the way through. There's a lot of stuff from all over the world. I'm a great fan of Albert Rosales. He's put together about 20,000 reports. He's a very industrious guy. His books are available. They're about humanoid encounters. And the main thing is the quality of the description. Now, what I found was that the big issue with humanoid encounters is people who know what they're doing to do the inquiring. Because what you tend to get is very Spartan reports by people who know very little about, like normally a journalist or someone who's interested, and they're not asking detail. So you have to have detail. You need to know how the humanoids behaved, what their emphasis was, what their entire personality was, what their technology did. That's humanoid research properly done. We tend to have to work with very limited descriptions, and all it gives us is a general overview. But FSR had some very good researchers in Brazil. There was a guy called Walter Buehler. There was a lady called Irene Granchi. There was a number of, I think there was another guy called Kessler. And unfortunately, some of these were German escapees from the war who'd gone to Brazil. So they weren't exactly, typical people. But they were, definitely Walter Buehler was a German soldier who was a medic who'd gone to live in Brazil. But these were fantastic researchers. There's quite a few through history that came from Latin America, and they had detailed reports. I think another one was Fulvio Brandt Alexio. He was a brilliant man. He's dead for the last 20 odd years, but his work still exists. And he did detailed questioning. So this is where we start from. There is some good stuff in FSR. There's some detailed stuff. So when I went into interviewing contacted people, I had detailed forensic questioning to give an overall picture. I had artists trying to work on what these things look like, trying to give the character of it, and then most importantly, the meaning. So, for me, that's where we start. It's the information. I'm worried when people mention in 2 or 3 lines an encounter in a book and think that's in any way credible. That's not how you describe encounters. And really, it's fairly straightforward to find people who've encountered once you get good at it. And you can then do the detailed inquiry. You can do the detailed descriptions and get the information that you need. It's there to be had. There's an awful lot of people who've encountered who've never reported. I would say we have less than 1% that's in the written history. I would say the vast majority have never been reported, other than some of them are anecdote that are known to ufologists who haven't even written them up. And often when you get ufologists together, they'll tell you stories and cases that have never been written up. So there's vast amounts of data, but the most important thing is the solidness of the encounter. You want to know how these things occurred. And what you find is getting into the alien agenda. What were they doing? What were they interested in? What were they trying to say or do? These are the things that, like, these are experienced ufologists, which there are very few field ufologists now, so we're a bit stuck. There are some good ones around, but there's only a few. And we really need to get to the solid ground again of good reports. So maybe rather than having 10,000 indifferent sort of short reports on UFOs, if we had 50 good quality encounters written up properly, we'd learn more than 10,000 badly written UFO reports. And it's detail. That's everything. So for me, I've got a job, I've got a life, and you haven't got that much time. But if you find a good case, get it written and get it on the web. And often I've found witnesses on the web who then you can interview in detail, and most of them I stay in contact with. So it's, for me, is to get the descriptions of how these. There was a very interesting pair of descriptions that was in my first issue I did, which was, I think it was 48.4 it might have been, and it was about two very similar encounters that happened. One happened in Washington State in a bar, and there was another one that happened in Reading, which is central England. And the chap in Reading and his friend were taken on board. This would have been about, I don't know, 92, 93. And they get the classic screen shown to them. And they see, this is something that's seen very often, slaughtering, civil war, natural disasters. And this small kind of female, very feminine alien woman says to them, some of you are destined to witness suffering as humans, and some of you will be the sufferers. Some of you have suffered in past lives. So straight away they're going into what they're interested in about humanity, and they bring up past lives, which is something we don't even understand as our own time. We don't understand it. And this very strange thing happened. She points to one of the lads who's in trance, and she says, he's going to suffer in this life. And he was dead within 2 years. He was an alcoholic. She pointed to the other guy and said, you suffered in a previous life. You're going to see him suffer. And it was very frank, you know. And then for me, I think this slaughter that they show you is in some way either paralyzing your senses so they can operate on you, because they do it so often. I don't think it's actually prediction at all. I think they're using it as a tool to test your brain. So they show you horror, they show you floods, they show you civil war, they show you like a very, very fast screen that shows human history, and some of it's not happened yet. And people come away and say, I've seen a prediction, there's terrible things coming, but I'm convinced that there was a good case from Venezuela, I think, that I picked up from FSR. And in it, these three doctors are approached by a tall humanoid who then talks about an ecological disaster to them. But luckily, one of them says, as he was doing that, I could feel him in the back of my head, looking into my mind. So he had me totally absorbed with what he was saying about his message that was going to be about stopping the crises that were coming for the world. But in fact, he was almost picking his pocket in his mind from behind while that was going on. So I start to think that these predictions of end world and end time are purely a tool to either assess our ability to have empathy or our higher selves, or in some way to manipulate our extremes of behavior. And they're testing us. So if we take it literally, then you know, if you're passive and you say, oh yeah, the world's going to end, yeah, that just tells us. I wonder what that would be. You know, that is a passive way to look at it. You're dealing with an intelligence that can travel across vast distances, that can dematerialize, that can read your mind. It can move your body on board a craft without other people noticing, and then it can embed information in you that change you for the rest of your life. And if we just take it literally that they're going to show us a few future images, I don't think they are. I think they're looking at our awareness, and they're looking at our capacity for psychic ability. And I think that they're manipulating us to try and create something closer to compatibility. And I think it's all manipulation. And I don't necessarily think they're doing it because there's, you know, a philanthropic reason they come to save us. I think that they have a vested interest in evolving us. So the faster we go, the more they're interested. The quicker we pick up on advances, the more they'll give us. That's where I'm coming from. So I'm sort of a believer in the diplomatic approach from the world of ufology. I think that we have to have a much more direct approach to the alien intelligence where we interact with them. So I was very strongly affected by early Stephen Greer. I mean, I don't want to comment as he is now, but his early ideas that you interact. I felt at the time he was the only person saying that in the early 90s. And I remember seeing his video, and I was outwardly totally shocked by the concept, but it was so correct. that we go and initiate. That was spot on at the time. I don't comment on the rest of his stuff because I don't feel it, I'm not a political person, but I do feel that his original idea of engaging and interacting. Now, I think the key to it is it's the psychic training, but I think it's not done in a book way. It's much more fluid than that. So for me, it's like the skills you get are with deep yoga, or when you look at Adamski, you look at, and people laugh at him, but I still like, great fan. You look at many of, even, I know Billy Meyer got a terrible time of it as well, but these were people who had deep control of their body energy. They had, their histories describe them going off and doing a lot of energetics in their body. And I think that you can't make shortcuts. I believe when we were trying to do our contact work, because I was involved a lot myself in doing contact work, we went to very high energy spots such as Silbury Hill, Avebury, various hot spots. Now, Britain's got a lot of them. We've got a lot of these Neolithic sites where there's a lot of springs, there's chalk mounds, and there's a lot of earth energy jumping about, stones and standing stones. And we would get energized there. We'd go into deep trance, we'd do trance work in crop circles, and you transform your energy. I did crystal lays, I did harmonics, I researched harmonic sound, I used a lot of harmonic light, which most people haven't heard of. So what I was looking at was trying to evolve, and that's really my approach to this, that they're trying to evolve us. So we can get information from encounters. That's what I'm interested in. I probably drifted off there.
Oh, that's no problem at all. Do you think that there are factions of our government that actually have ongoing contact with some of these beings, possibly work with these beings? What are your thoughts on that?
It's difficult for me because I've met MIBs during my early days. We were very scared. When we started seeing UFOs, I was out in a group at Lufon. We'd go out, we'd try and encounter. We'd have close encounters and we'd see these strange people who would appear, who were policing the boundary. So on one occasion, we were next to a ploughed field. We knew it was a good contact spot. We had some close UFO contact, and this Land Rover, this is England, strange, and these men were jumping out of this Land Rover and running along behind in the middle of the field. Now that was MIB for sure. Because there's no reason for men to be running outside a vehicle and running along behind. They were like falling out like ants out the back of the vehicle. We had some big encounters that night. I certainly met two MIB in '96 next to the famous DNA crop circle, and I also got an MIB phone call. Now at the time we were using a car that didn't have a recognised logbook, so we weren't traceable, and I got called and interrogated on the phone by an MIB. So I think what I'm certain of is that there's a policing group between the alien beings and the members of the public. And we are, a number of people I've met who've run into these. Now, people might mistake them for our own authorities. I've never really, FSR's published stuff, but I've never actually had any evidence myself. I know that they are going to be very worried what I'd say, because it's one of the most awkward things is what do the authorities know? What do they not want us to know? We had this phrase, I'm going to bring this up and sod them. There's a secret war. That was the FSR byline for the sort of 2007, 2008, that sort of era. There's definitely, we launch aircraft and missiles against them routinely. That's known. It's not published much. I got enough cases to say that it's happening. That means at least some of them aren't working with us, because obviously we're trying to shoot them down, and we seem to randomly try and shoot them down. I don't think there's any specific group that would, if there is, there's definitely people who know, and there's definitely people with a massive technological lead who are in our elite. So there's definitely people with technology that's way ahead. But whether they have any on-site help from a higher civilization, I don't have any evidence. I do know that we've got to shoot to kill, in my opinion. I'm the only person saying it. But I've heard enough cases where missiles are launched, aircraft are taken out, they don't want to talk about it, they don't want me to talk about it. As long as I don't do specifics, there's no evidence. So whenever I used to write about it, I don't write where, when, and who, just that it happened. And my view is that if we're shooting at them, there can't be many of them living and working with us. That's my personal view. I think we'll launch and we'll do airstrikes against them. Somehow that material has never, ever come out. So no one's ever filmed aircraft having dogfights. Now, my view is the MIB would stop it. Does that make sense? That if you had that footage, if you had a film of an aircraft fighting a UFO, that police force that I've mentioned would take it. They'd never get it out because it's too disturbing for our civilization. But my view is that certainly missiles are launched, drones are launched. There's new super drones that we've got again. I'll be in trouble, shouldn't say. Drones are being launched that are not like normal drones. These are super high speed ones. I mean, we live in a fantasy world if we think the military that we see is anything representing what there's out there. This is like we're seeing 50-year-old technology or 100-year-old technology, in my view. I think that the mistake is to attack them. I think that's, I mean, again, I'm not in a position. I've never, ever sat with the military. Thankfully, they've never done anything to me, so we obviously don't distrust each other that much. I've never had a bad time with them. But I think it's a big mistake to try and fight people you don't know. That's my view. And I think if they are doing that, how on earth are they meant to be helped by them, to me, doesn't make sense. Why would you be firing at them? And also, if we fire at them, we don't have any control over what's going on. I think we're much better engaging with them in another way. But then maybe I'm naive, but I just think that, I don't think that anybody has that much contact. I think they've got a lot of technology, but I don't know if they've got any beings. That's where I stand on it, and that's just me. I haven't heard anything convincing. The tall white stuff, those aliens don't sound right to me. What I know about tall beings is that they're totally different in how they think to us. These are like very tall, 10-foot, 9-foot beings. I've never heard them thinking anything that would resemble logic or living in a way that we could understand them. Do you see what I mean? For me, they're so beyond us, and the material that I've got where people have interacted with them, I can't see them living on a base or talking to anyone. They don't exist like that. They are so beyond us. They're kind of like angel type beings that are so beyond us, we wouldn't be able to even bloody engage with them. That's where I stand on it, my personal opinion. I can't see how one of those would walk around and just be like a resident somewhere. They're too bloody weird. The kind of descriptions, they're not in any way emotionally recognizable. They're not in any way kind of, what's the word? They don't behave like us in a recognizable way. I think that's like trying to ask a gorilla to come and live with us and expect him to take on a human. But obviously it's from the other end. We'd be the gorillas in this situation. But they don't, they're just so alien to us. Every time you deal with humanoids, you're dealing with things that live on such a different level. I can't see how we're going to cohabit with them in any sort of frame of any kind. I think they'd be bewildered by us. I think they wouldn't want to live with us, in my view. That's just my view. I mean,
now, Harry, we have just a few minutes left. For the last few minutes that we have, I know that I'd like to do another show with you more about humanoids, but you were showing me an image. It looked like a gray alien earlier. I thought maybe you could show that image just to kind of give a little teaser for the next show. It is absolutely fascinating, and then the story behind that image.
Well, this is difficult in that people are quite, skeptical in ufology and quite rude to each other. So the picture will never convince anybody. That's my view. The picture will never convince. I'm just looking. No, it's not there. It's not that one. It's one of these Lachlan ones. That was the Lachlan Reserve, Lachlan Group. Now, I better say at this point that there's going to be, like after Lachlan, I went to Lachlan. I met you through Lachlan, which is a huge, valuable resource. I've been very moved by everything that happened over my time going there, because I've seen like what I'll just try and I can see a couple of pictures there. Let's see if I can just get the share up. There you go. Can you see that? That's a very blurry one.
Yes, I can.
That was taken on board a craft with a living wall in it. That strangeness behind is a living wall. It's never going to prove anything to anybody. I mean, there's images where you can see the texture of the skin, etc., which for me is more convincing.
Now, for this particular image, is there any type of story behind it?
Yeah, it was a difficult case because people's passions.
Would you be able to pull that up again? I think the screen.
Let's just get this up again. Let's see if I can get it. Oh, I'll put another one up as well. That was that one. Do that one first. Where am I? Share screen. Put that up again. So there are clearer versions of that in our other one. That is, what I like is the light quality above it. You know, I said about blinding light. And light that doesn't spread, that would be the thing. You know, when you said, how do you recognize a genuine UFO? That's light that's not going anywhere. Do you see it's just like on the side of his head, some of it's on his shoulders, but it's not going anywhere. It's not shining. It's localized light. That is what describes a real UFO. If a UFO produces light and it doesn't spread anywhere, it doesn't have a beam, that's not conventional. So if I can just...
And these beings allowed him to photograph them?
Yeah, he had, in my view, because I've recently had a UFO encounter there again, so it's very difficult because there are skeptical people. I had a UFO encounter there. Can you see that one? Is that a different one? Can you see that?
We're still on the same one.
Oh, God. Let's have a look. I'll put that new share. There we go. Put it on that one. Do you see that? Now, that's a movement artifact in that, but that's a skull bone there. Can you see that? Can you see that one?
Yes, see that one, yes. Yes.
There's a skull, there's a maxilla bone there. There's a skull eye socket. There's a, you know, what we're looking at, that's a movement. That was taken outside, as far as I remember, under a tree. That being wasn't visible, but when it was shot, you get a skull, and it's a movement artifact. But this is a particular type of species. You know, this is, see if I can pull something else up, because I did show you that earlier as well.
Yes, those are amazing.
Well, it is in that they're not good enough to say that they're definitive, but they are representative of what humanoids are. So, see if I can get that up. There's the one I like there. I'm very fond of her. So I can move that out of the way. She's taken down a lane where we go. I mean, she has blonde hair that goes back like that. There's a strange black sort of object that's on her back. Again, there's a lot, you know, this is a very strange picture. It's a very strange picture. But certainly for me, that type of entity is something I've seen. I know other people have seen that type of entity. They'll only allow a certain level. These are, like I would say, low res, low contrast images for a reason. They're there because people are going to get something of an idea what they're like, but without going anywhere near the kind of, what's the word I could use? The kind of reality that you'd want to, and I'll put that one up for some UFO stuff, which is, again, it's not perfect. I'll just get back onto there. Where am I? I can't get the share screen up, can I? Let's close that one. Okay, now good, I can get that up. These sort of strange pictures. Now, again, a skeptic will say, well, why is that blurred? You're going to get the sharper versions of those. They are alien craft. They're giving you what they want to give you, if you see what I mean. They're giving you what they as far as they're concerned, in my opinion, that's revealing a, what's the word? An image that will be representative of what the kind of world that they come from. But I'm certain that they're much weirder and stranger than we really know at this stage. So we're holding on to ideas that won't serve us because they're not going to be integrating with us in the way that we want them to integrate until we evolve quite radically, shall we say. There's a lot of radical evolution that's going to come out of this. That's what I think.
And that's kind of what I'd like to close on, is with this evolution, with people waking up, with more people, coming on board with the idea of life outside of human life, outside of the planet, other dimensions. Do you think that this contact and communication will become more of a normal thing and more often?
I think there'll be radical changes in how people go about doing ufology. I think the kind of internet ufology has been a lingering death, shall we say, for the subject. We've come up with this thing called triumvirate, which is the guys who met me in Lachlan, which one's called JP, who's an Englishman like myself, and there's John Enoch, who's a phenomenon in his own right, and myself, and we're going to have our own little talk shows to try and move towards this internationalism that's coming. So there was a very interesting development 2 years ago called the Five Continents Movement, where nations tried to get together to create a UN type organization. I think that will happen, but outside the UN. That's my personal opinion. And I think that we're going to be radically different as ufologists. The days of us putting up with being at each other's throats and fighting for the limelight, hopefully are going to come to an end. Because that, for me, is what killed ufology, was people fighting for crumbs and losing their dignity and forgetting about the higher self. You know, this is what ufology is about, regardless of our backgrounds, because we're all human. None of us are perfect. None of us have got anything different to any other human being, but we can be self-aware that this is going to drive us to some new behaviors, and some of it will be radical psychic developments. I think technology developments, the way we see the world is going to change, and we need to be on a different plane to get in with these beings. And if we're going to achieve things, it's going to come from work. So passive speculation and proclamations, and people with conspiracy ideas, which I shudder at the idea of not doing any research. If you believe in conspiracy, you've got to get in and get the data. And for me, the idea that we are going to be dealing with secret societies and things, I don't think any of that really is relevant to ufology. It might be useful for other things, but what we're really dealing with are entities that are so evolved that we really need to start getting into their world. And that's where I'm coming from. That, you know, and of course I believe it's a world issue, and there's very talented people in ufology. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean that. I've met so many people in Lachlan that I was impressed by, and but what I mean is it's the behaviour to in this environment. There's kind of like a minimalism that comes in where we're just not representing the subject well. Does that make sense? It's not about anyone being bad, but if the subject comes out the way it's been coming out, it's got nowhere to go. There's no higher level sort of mind there. So, like, you know, I'm very pleased with your Forbidden Knowledge channel. I mean, you give people a chance to speak. You've got like a very, like, you're coming from where I'm coming from, which is allow people to come up with ideas. If you don't like their ideas, do something else. You know, we don't have to do each other's heads in if we don't agree. I mean, I might not like conspiracy. It doesn't mean I'm right. It just means that I feel that the aliens themselves are so blooming weird. We've got to focus somewhere on the alien stuff, you know, to leave human society alone and just deal with alien encounters and try and understand them, and then try and communicate with them and have diplomacy with them. That's, for me, is big enough without analysing who's holding secrets and who knows what and what really happened. I don't think it matters. It's like getting out there and doing the work. I mean, I suppose it's frustration to a degree that we've got such a poor level of public perception. You know, that's sad for me. Like I say, we all can change. I mean, I'm sure I've been an arse in my time, and loads of people, we're allowed to be. It's just what we do it work-wise matters. That's what matters. And like I say, we'll have to learn to forgive each other, I suppose. These will come back to the humanity side of it. Forgive each other, allow each other to disagree, allow each other to be respected regardless. You know, that's my view. And then try and be internationalists. So try and, I mean, I certainly think FSR was the, you know, and even UFO Academy was the idea of bringing the world together. And one of my happiest moments at UFO Academy is meeting people from other countries coming to see a UFO talk. That made me happy. And I still believe in, that there's better to come, that we'll have a much better quality media, and we're not going to be these people fighting for crumbs. I think this is the mistake. We really have to respect each other. And I know when people, if I don't agree with someone, what they're doing, what I do is I just don't do anything with them. And that's the best way. Let them do their thing. And if they don't like what I'm doing, then don't do anything with me. But I just want to give people maybe a bit of optimism that there is high quality to be had out there. Some high quality stuff. I think it will be a much better ufology once people get their heads around how weird these aliens are. We're definitely not representing them anything like as crazy as the situation is. These beings are nothing like us. And I think that's where we've gone wrong. So I took the example of the tall whites. All I'm saying is maybe that guy deserves respect. I don't know his work. All I know is the idea of a tall white living in a base with humans around them doesn't make sense to me, because they are so different. They don't even have bodies most of the time. They have bodies when they're in our presence. These things operate as non-physical balls of light, or they exist as some sort of strange reality that we don't understand. They come together and sort of form up and become a tall human in front of us. God knows what they actually are. They've evolved beyond bones and flesh. They're not things like us. And the idea that they would live alongside us, yeah, we'd love it. I'd love it. If they do it, maybe I'll stand corrected and someone one day will prove it and I was wrong, and that's fine. But I can't see a being that can be a blob of light, that can penetrate your mind, that can move through space and time, that can read any piece of information and have all knowledge available to it, is going to sit there and live alongside you in that way. But then again, the friendship case had them making omelettes and smoking cigars. So I think they do seem to come into our reality and take on our, because that's the weird thing, the Italian friendship case, they smoke cigars, they drive Fiats. I mean, then maybe I've just contradicted myself there on that one.
No, yeah, I agree with you. There's so much more that we have to understand about this, and I think that more fields of ufology, paranormal research, consciousness needs to come together and work together more to try and understand the phenomenon and, stop arguing and put the egos aside.
Yeah.
But Harry, thank you so much for coming on. Interesting and fresh perspective, and I can't wait till we do our next show. Before we head out, is there any information if people want to know a little bit more about your research, where they can go to find it?
Well, there's definitely triumvirites about to come out, so that'll be a very interesting thing. I've got to put it up as a UFO channel, a YouTube channel, because it's triumvirate. There's no one else who's going to be calling themselves that. It's going to be our little talking group, and then I will be doing something which will be maybe Harry Challenger under Harry Challenger's name. I'll put it up as Harry Challenger. And then people will see some, because what I call edgy ufology I want to do. I want to do crazy, edgy ufology. And a lot of, like you do, I want to talk to strange and wonderful people who've had encounters around the world. I think that's where I'll be going next. And, hopefully we can all cross-pollinate, because to me it's getting these people who are all corners of the world. The FSR legacy and what Gordon Crichton gave to me from FSR was Flying Saucer Review, was to go to those people in every country of the world. I'm sure that's what the right thing to do is, get their stories, get the cases get the people from all different countries talking, and get their perspectives on from their part of the world, what they're experiencing and how this thing can evolve, because I want to evolve it. See how we do while we're still capable of doing it. We're young still. We're all relatively young. We can still do this. We've got time. We can do it. That's Definitely. My words. So yes. Triumvirate, look out for that. It's going to be on YouTube and probably Harry Challenger. That's it. The FSR is always going to be there. Flying Saucer Review. Just contact me on that. I'll be there as Harry Challenger. And hopefully you'll hear more, because I want to do a good show with you on humanoids and really get. Because what I've been trying to say is they're so different and so weird. If I go into detail, I can sort of explain that. Definitely. Perspective. And then we can get hold of the humanoid and really understand it. That's what I want.
Yes, we're very much looking forward to that. Harry, thank you so much again for coming on, and we will see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.